Oh, wait. What's going on? Oh, you're here? Why are you here? I thought it was just me. Oh, we're talking boxing history. I understand. I understand. What's going on, folks? Joshua here, holding it down. 86 boxing, you know the deal. Got a little series. I called it Boxing History Every Night. Clearly, it's not happening every night, but we are here, baby. We are here. Now, as I always say, thank you for all those that will be attending, assuming someone attends, as well as those that will be re-listening, assuming you're re-listening or listening to the replay, as they say. Anyway, just wanted to come on here, talk a little history, talk a little Packey McFarland. I'm going to set things up here on the Facebook site to make sure we are 100% live. And when that happens, we're going to be off to the races, folks. Off to the races, as they say. Now, as mentioned, it has been a good little bit. This is the first sort of history-based discussion in a good bit here. A good while, I would say. I can't even remember when the last one was. Time gets crazy. As they say, time is of the essence in most cases. But regardless of such, we're here to make it happen. All right, I'm almost there. Just getting it set up here on Facebook. Facebook had this update that made it to where you have to go and set the audience to public or something, or maybe it's something I'm doing wrong. But I have to edit the audience to make sure it's public now on Facebook. So that's what was happening here. But besides that, as mentioned, here to talk a little boxing history, a little Packey McFarland. Shout out to my man Random Acoustic Thoughts in the building right there. Salute to you, Random. Appreciate you there, buddy. Folks, if you haven't checked them out, do so now. Go subscribe. Be sure to check out some videos, like those videos. Random and I have done a number of videos that have centered on the history of the sport and some of the greatest fighters we've seen in the history of the sport. He actually has a live he did recently on his channel that is worth checking out as well. It's a collaboration between himself, Scrapbook Boxing, and the Boxing Librarian. So you'll definitely want to check that out. Get a lot of good insight info talking about the early days. Some would say the golden era. So appreciate you being here, Random Acoustic Thoughts. But as mentioned, the intent is to talk a bit of Packey McFarland, the great Packey McFarland, a.k.a. the pride of the stockyards. One of, if not the greatest lightweight that the sport has seen. I repeat, one of, if not the greatest lightweight that the sport of boxing has seen. That is Packey McFarland. If you don't believe me, then let me just show you a little bit about the man, what his record stands at. So, that you see there, the pride of the stockyards, hailing from Chicago, Illinois, boasts a record of 70 wins with 50 knockouts, 0 losses. We'll get to that. 5 draws and 38 no decisions. Now, if you're familiar with the history of the sport, or if you're not, what I will tell you is sometimes some records can be a bit deceiving in some sense. I'll pull that back up there. So that 70 wins could very well be 100 plus wins. So as a matter of fact, it could be 102 wins, or 106 wins rather, with 0 losses. Think about that for a second. There's this thing called no decisions that, depending on who you ask, they can affect a boxer's overall record. So no decision bouts. For those that may be new to them, I'll explain it, though those familiar will have heard it a number of times, but never an issue rehashing such. But essentially, no decision bouts being those in which they were either in a state or locality that did not render official decisions. And therefore, when that happened, it came down to the journalists in attendance. So essentially, not unlike what you see these days, where you have media who is at ringside and they share their opinions on the fights. It was like that back in the day. And when you had these situations where there were no decision bouts, you'd have to look at what the media thought. And for the most part, and this is something that I know Random is versed in, and we've talked about it on a number of occasions, these writers, they got it right. And they were straight to the point. They were, what do you say, objective, subjective, whichever one. But they essentially kept it real. So those were the situations at those particular times. So when you saw those no decision bouts and those no decision verdicts, or what the newspapers saw or whom they deemed in favor, sometimes or more oftentimes than not, that was in all likelihood the real deal right there. Like I said, we have official decisions these days in the sport, and we don't often get them right, So to view no decisions in a different light would be kind of hypocritical in a sense. So that's where that comes into play when thinking about Packey McFarland's record. Real quick, shout out to my man Boz in here, just Boz. Says, hey, what up, Josh? Hey, appreciate you here, Boz. Check Boz and myself out on the Boxing Chit podcast. We hook up on Sundays, though. Salute to Peter, who's been filling in for the days that I haven't been there. And for the record, so I do officiate amateur boxing, and it just so happens the last 2 weeks, for sure, we've had Sunday boxing events, but that should die down here now that we are past, or once we get past the month of June. And there's a big national tournament going down, the Junior Olympics tournament, at the latter part of this month. So that'll take up everything for the most part for the month of June, because that's where a lot of the young fighters will be. So that being said, check out Boxing Chit. Check out Just Boz. Be sure to go over there, subscribe to his channel. Appreciate you being here, Boz. Boz says Packey. I assume his real name was Patrick. You are correct right there, Boz. Ding. You get a hoodie. But yes, it was Patrick. Packey McFarland. As I was mentioning there, Boz, Chicago native. Born, I want to say 1886, somewhere around there. If I'm not mistaken, somewhere around there. I decided to go the route of taking it off top for the most part for this discussion, because I really wanted to be more of a discussion. And if others want to hop on, hey, feel free, let me know. We can talk about it. You know anything about Packey? I definitely want to hear about it, because great fighter, great lightweight. Cheer there, Fly Hopper. Fly Hopper's in the building. Says 86 boxing. Appreciate you gaming with Fly Hopper. I take it you got some gaming stuff on your channel, so want to definitely check you out there, Fly Hopper. But folks, go check him out, especially if you're into gaming. I haven't checked him out yet, but that doesn't mean that I won't. There, appreciate you dropping in, checking out some of this boxing history for sure. Boz says, I remember the Irish team goalkeeper was called Packy Bunner. All right, 90s. There was a fighter from back in the early days called Jack Bunner. I wonder if there's some relation. One can never know. There are a lot of people of Irish descent. I believe Jack was born here in the U.S., but who knows? Maybe his people were of Irish descent. Jack Bunner. He had some pretty solid matchups during his time. One of those contending heavyweights. That's what I would say. Contending. Rodolfo Rivera Jr. is in the building. Salute to you there, Rodolfo. Appreciate you dropping in, buddy. As always, good to see you. Rodolfo Rivera Jr. trying to get him to come talk boxing at some point. Hey, anytime, Rodolfo, you know what it is. Hey, Rodolfo, you see this? Or no, this side. You see that right there? I'm representing for the world of soccer right here. We have a lot going on in the soccer world, so I'm representing. That's what that means. Anyway, Yeah, we're talking a little Packey McFarland. So I wanted to come on, make it a discussion. As mentioned, hadn't done one of these in a while. Packey McFarland, one of, if not the greatest lightweights of all time, as I had previously mentioned, and a guy you could say could very well be undefeated in a 100 plus fights. Undefeated in 100 plus fights, which is a feat in itself, right there, as we know. That is a feat. But you take into account the no decisions in regards to that. But it is expected or reported that he lost to a guy by the name of Dusty Miller. This was in, I believe, 1904. And that is regarded as his first and only loss of his career in some sense. But the reporting on such varied because there was mention that he was actually knocked out as well as it was a decision. And yeah, it's not very clear, kind of muddy in all actuality, a bit muddy, so that goes into account as well. Random Acoustic Thought says writers often had forfeit money and messages for fighters and or management. They had a compelling reason to judge no decision bouts honestly, and mostly did, at least in the early 1900s. Reputation was key. Most certainly. Think about some of the great writers. They provided us some round by round, some fight by fight accounts so we could see what was, or at least read what was happening through each round, which fighter got the better of the round, who may have landed the more significant shots, or who were the more active fighter. So a lot of that stuff factored in. So Random Acoustic Thoughts is 100% on the money there. And I know you know there, Random. You put in a lot of research, so I know you know. There's also a footballer called Roy McFarland says, just buys, but enough about that. Yeah. Let's go there, Boz. Hey, all these little things. Boz sends his regard to you there, Random. I'll see you there, Rodolfo. Euro start this Friday. Yeah, gonna try to check out some of that for sure. Henry DiCarlo. Hey, what's going on, Henry DiCarlo? Been a minute. Appreciate you there, Henry DiCarlo. That is yeah, it's been a good while, but appreciate you dropping by. Salute to you for sure. Says any film. Actually, there's a little bit of film out there on Packey McFarland. Now, you'll have to look through a couple of channels to find a version that is slowed down from a frame rate perspective, because there are some versions out there for sure that are sped up a bit. So you'll find two films of Packey McFarland in action. One of those was the third fight with what is his name? British lightweight, former British lightweight champion. I said I was doing this off top. Oh, his face is right there. Oh yeah, Freddie Welsh. So he's the Welsh lightweight champion, or Welsh lightweight champion. Well, he was a world lightweight champion, but Welsh fighter, one of the Welsh greats. So Freddie Welsh, or Welch. Which one is it? Welsh, something like that. But yeah, hailing from Wales. So there's film of him in their third fight. They had a trilogy, right? And there's also film of Packey McFarland taking on Mike Gibbons, another fighter who has a scarcity of film out there. Mike Gibbons, that is. And I believe Mike Gibbons, he only has that fight and maybe another available, along with some training he was doing with Tommy Gibbons. So yes, there is some film out there, Henry DiCarlo. So it's worth checking out for sure. I believe you can find some where it slowed down a bit, as mentioned, because you know how some of those old fight films or the footage, it's sped up in some sense. I guess just how it translates when converted over. And I know that there are channels out there that go through the process of slowing things down. Slow it down. And that helps. So you can get a real viewing experience as though you were there. But there is film of him out there. So good question there, Henry. Good question. Just buys. Northern Ireland has quite a legacy too. Renty Monaghan, Johnny Caldwell, Dave McCauley, Barry McGeehan, Carl Frampton, along with McFarland, of course. Oh yeah, Carl Frampton. Yes, of recent times there. So those are some good fighters right there. Gaming mentions John L. Sullivan, certainly another guy of Irish descent right there, John L., who played a major part in boxing history in general, as well as heavyweight history for sure, but in general, and the Marquess of Queensberry rules, all of that good stuff. So that is worth mentioning for sure. Oh, and Jimmy McLaren, born near Belfast. Yep. The great Belfast Spider, another one of the greats that we've seen in the sport for sure. Cheers to you, Dan. Dan is in the building, folks. Dan comes with a lot of knowledge and history. Appreciate you being there, Dan. Salute to you. Been a long time. We're here talking some history there, Dan. So it's great to have you in the mix here. We're talking Packey McFarland. Boz says you need to read up on Monaghan if you haven't. Hey, I got to read up on him there, Boz. Thanks for that nod right there. I'm going to definitely do so. So, yeah, we're talking Packey McFarland. And, of course, on the channel, one of the latest videos, a video from this year, dropped on the 1st of 2024. Oh, we're halfway there, pretty much. We're halfway through the year. But there is a Packey McFarland documentary on the channel that will give you a lot more insight than what I can recollect on or be able to recall just solely and purely in this discussion that we're having. But you will see that he was one of the great fighters of his time, and he fought in a time where the lightweight limit wasn't 135 pounds. It was actually more than that 130 or it became 135 pounds at some point, and he fought below that for the most part through his career. So I can't say that it was solely just not 135, but he eventually started to be competed at 135. But not unlike in other weight divisions, you'll see situations in history where, say, for instance, the middleweight title, it was on the line and it was fought at 152 pounds. Yes, that happens. Think of guys like Nonpareil Jack Dempsey. He was practically more of a welterweight, but he was middleweight champion, and it was often competed at 152, well below 160. This was before the junior middleweight class came about, and he often weighed in at 147 or generally around that weight. So that's just an example. So same with lightweight. There were times when it was fought below 135 at 133 pounds, for instance. Joe Gans, of course, knew about that because he had some famous fights that transpired in or around that weight with the title on the line. And I believe that's the reason that Sam Langford wasn't able to win the world title when he fought Joe Gans and beat Joe Gans because he came in he came in overweight. And I believe it was set at 133 day of fight or afternoon of fight. And he came in over something of that tune. I know Random knows that for sure. So example right there. So salute to Bruce Gas, Boxing, Jazz, and more. Appreciate you there, Bruce. As always, hey, folks, be sure to go check out Bruce. A lot of great content going on the channel. Plus, he does quizzes. I enjoy those quizzes that touch on modern times to the history of the sport. So a lot of engagement there. Appreciate you there, Bruce. Thanks for dropping by, buddy. Henry DiCarlo says John L. fought like MMA. Yes, he certainly did. There were points when he did that. He fought some bare knuckle matchups where you could, essentially do the things that, or some of the things at least, that you see in the world of MMA these days. Some of that early on stuff. But that's the case with a lot of fighters who were fighting even prior to Sullivan, especially when you take into account the bare knuckle London prize ring rules. You could get away with some extracurricular stuff, essentially. And that was not uncommon during those times. And you usually weren't fighting in a ring. You were fighting pretty much wherever you could fight, even if that meant you were somewhere in the backwoods of a forest or in the basement of a saloon or something of that nature. As long as you had enough space, you could fight. And that contributed to a lot of that for sure. Also born in Ireland, Nonpareil. Most certainly there. Nonpareil was just mentioning him there, Dan, and his feats as being one of the smaller middleweights, but certainly middleweight champion of the world. The man. Max Duran says, what is up? Hey, Max, good to see you there, buddy. Been a while, of course. We haven't talked about history here just in a dedicated setting in a good bit, so it's good to see you in the mix here, Max, for sure. For sure. So salute to you, Max. Thanks for joining in, buddy. Random says on YouTube, 75% speed for the old timey hand crank footage gets closer, a bit slow. All right, that's good. Yes, you can slow some of the footage down. So if you see some of that, there's a setting that will allow you to slow it down a bit. So around 75, yeah, that gives you more of a feel, not necessarily perfect, but more of a feel of kind of what you would expect to see were you actually there in person. Monaghan stopped Jackie Patterson twice. All right, there, Boz dropping facts out here. I'm gonna have to check them out. Maybe I should know him, Boz. Let me know. Maybe I should. But appreciate everyone showing love. What about Joe Louis? Joe Louis is a man right there. Gaming with Flyhopper 412. Joe Louis, one of, if not the greatest heavyweights of all time. And man, just an amazing fighter to watch. And we have plenty of footage of Joe, the Brown Bomber, fought in what is the most significant fight in the history of the sport, I would say. And you could say potentially the most significant sporting event of all time when he took on Max Smelling in their second fight in forget the year, but you all know what I'm talking about. You all know what happened, right? So that's the man right there. Dan, hey, Bruce, I got to start eating my greens. Great to see you, Master. Indeed there, Dan. Don't we all there, Dan? My man Max in the building. Max says, been researching Sam Langford, more unbelievable career, maybe the best pound-for-pound fighter ever. Most certainly there, Max. I mean, it's amazing some of the things that he was able to do in the sport at his size. Because, yeah, you look at it today, no, he's not a heavyweight. He's a light heavyweight, maybe even a 168-pounder, a super middleweight. But he was able to just accomplish feats that largely you won't see, and think about it. He was around the same height as Canelo Alvarez. So to think things are unbelievable or can't be done, just look at Canelo. He's been able to rise up a good deal. He's 168 pounds. He won the title at 175, regardless of how he done it. Of course, 4-belt era. Just think of what Sam Langford could have done had he been given those same opportunities, for sure. For sure. Monaghan. Okay, Monaghan. Where's he from? Ireland there, boss? Greatest champion in history, any sport. Certainly there. Max, what is that? Josh can talk about it for hours. That's funny. Joey Lewis, greatest champion in any sport in history. I feel you there, Dan. Most certainly. Hey, there was a man for sure. There was a man. But yes, we could talk about some of these other guys for a good deal. As we could talk about them. No, we're good. It's controlled here, Max. It's controlled. Yeah, we're talking Packey McFarland. So Packey McFarland, 135-pounder, or just under that. So that's one of the things with Packey McFarland. He never got a world title shot, though he was close on several occasions. It's often cited that the weight was one of the main things. And, and while weight was one of those things, it wasn't just solely weight. It was also just circumstances. I mean, he was going to fight at Wolgast at one point, and circumstantially, some things got in the way. Weight was a part of it early on, but even when they got to the point that they were going to fight, it turned out to be just an issue with the commission, or yes, you can say the sheriff, allowing for the fight to go on. I believe this is the sheriff of Milwaukee at that particular time. So that would have been an opportunity. Of course, he didn't get to fight Joe Gans, and then eventually Joe Gans died. He didn't get to fight Battling Nelson. It seemed that Battling Nelson ducked Packey McFarland. I know that's a word we throw out often these days, but it seems that Battling Nelson really didn't want to fight him, and therefore you factor all those things in. Yeah, he never got a world title shot, but he did a lot of great things at 135 pounds. And he was in with some top-tier competition, you name it. Let's see here. Monahan, like Solo, like Monday. Okay. Monahan. Okay, got you right there. Right, breaking it down. Joe, the fastest hands of all champs. Joe had the fastest hands of all champs. He had those short punches right there. I'll give the fastest hands to. none other than Ali himself. Certainly at the heavyweight. But I feel you there, Henry. Feel you for sure. Dan Crazy Packey, never a champion, never lost. Great era he dominated. Certainly he did. Certainly. Peter McFarland was a great goal scorer for Northern Ireland in the World Cup 1958, I believe. Very similar name. Yes, there's also a McFarland out there as well. Boz, there's a McFarland. I forget his first name. And then there's a Eddie McFarland who fought during that period too, or maybe it was just a moniker for Packey McFarland. But Packey was something there, Max. He was certainly something. Gaming fly hopper, James J. Corbett. A lot of people didn't like him there, gambling fly hopper. Corbett rubs a lot of people the wrong way, realistically there. But he did do some good things, I guess, in the sport. He showed you, hey, sometimes that skill comes over or goes over the size or whatnot. So, but he was certainly one who rubbed some people the wrong way, fly hopper. But I did watch that movie that they did, a biopic on him called Gentleman Jim, I believe. It was recommended on here. It's in black and white. Errol Flynn played him, and it was a very, very good movie. Very good movie. So I recommend that one. And they were pretty on course for the most part with some of the things that took place in his career from a fighting perspective. Of course, you had a love interest, all that stuff. It is a movie, but they were pretty on point with it. Shortest, hardest, fastest KO. Certainly there. Kid McFarland. Yeah, you're right. You're right there, Dan. That's the man for sure. Langford and Lewis, king of short power. Certainly. Kid McFarland. Certainly. That's what you're mentioning there, Dan. Bruce Gaz, Bob Hope boxed for a while as Packey East. Oh, that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. Bob Hope. Oh, yeah. I know he did a lot of good work with the USO as well. Very appreciative of the military right there. Bob Hope was. So, RIP Bob Hope. Salute to Bob Hope. But Corbett was horrifically racist in the press. He was, dear Random. He was. He was. Old freaking James J. Corbett. Oh, yeah, I found it. McFarland was born in the USA. My bad. Yeah. He was born in Chicago there. Boz. He was born in Chicago. Packey McFarland was. So, as mentioned, I wanted to have a discussion on him, just kind of how he stacks up with some of the great lightweights in history. So, a couple of fights that escaped him. I mentioned him. Ad Wolgas, that was one. Joe Gans, that was another. Battling Nelson, that is one. So we know he had wins over some great lightweights that the sport has seen in history. We think about, as I was mentioning the Welsh Wizard, Freddie Welsh. So Packey McFarland defeated him on 2 occasions. One of them was a draw, or they might have actually said that the third, I believe, was a draw or something like that. But in actuality, Packey got the better of him. So you could say, in theory, when you factor all things in, that Packey was the better fighter. But make no mistake about it, that the Welsh Wizard, man, he was a handful. He was a beast for sure. One to watch, no doubt about it. 1800s boxers, certainly. Yeah, a lot of these guys were born in the 1800s. They're gaming with fly hopper. We call you fly hopper, but yeah, a lot of these guys are 1800s guys. Packey McFarland being one of them when he was born, at least. So Packey stood, I had to look this up, 5'7" with a 69-inch reach. So he was a guy who, you think about it, for lightweight, that's some pretty decent size right there. Maybe bigger than some lightweights. So that's something to mention and worth holding weight. So I'm going to look through here again. So, right, let me do this real quick. And we can go through and we can talk about some of the individuals that Packey McFarland was able to beat. I don't remember all of them off top. So I'm going to rekindle the flame right there. Kid Goodman, solid fighter from the period. Kid Herman, Young Laurie. I mentioned Freddie Welsh, Jimmy Britt, Phil Brock. If you don't know him, look him up. Decent fighter from that period. Leech Cross, king of the 4-rounders is what they call him. Dick Hyland, solid fighter. Jack Goldswain, another fighter that was a British fighter, very good. Young Earn, Jack Britton, the boxing marvel, know him. Owen Moran, Younger Hearn. He's a fighter, not a huge name, but he was in there with a lot of guys, top tier. Harlem Tommy Murphy. Oh, man. This is just crazy. This is bringing back memories. Matt Wells, the British fighter, one of the few to defeat him. Just bringing back memories right there. So Packey McFarland had he had some crazy wins. And some crazy competition just in general. Just think about that. Some of the names I was mentioning there. Jack Britton, the boxing marvel, former world welterweight champion. So Packey McFarland was in with Jack Britton on multiple occasions at that. And pretty much he got the better of Jack Britton. And we know Jack Britton is one of the greatest fighters the sport has seen. There's some that hold him in high regard. And he definitely, in that argument, is the greatest welterweight we've ever seen. Talking 300 plus fight club, and Packey McFarland was well a part of that for sure. So that gives you an understanding, an idea of just how good Packey McFarland was, that he could get the better of in multiple fights. Not that all of them were good fights, but multiple fights with the boxing marvel Jack Britton. Getting a little text message in, some pictures. Yeah, Wayne McCullough, got you there. Got you there, Vibes. Alexander Kemper, salute to you, Alexander. Appreciate you dropping in, buddy. Cheers. Some of the NI names are Scots, or as they call them, the Northern Ireland names, as they call themselves, Ulster Scot. My dad was raised in Belfast and sure as hell never considered himself Irish. He was Scottish by birth, British law. Okay, got you right there. Good to know right there, Alexander. That is definitely good to know. Appreciate you sharing such there, Alex. So that's where some of the names can be a bit tricky, I guess you could say, in terms of while in theory they associate with Irish in some sense, that doesn't necessarily mean that those with the names are tied to or identified specifically as such. So good to know right there, Alex, and great have you in the mix here again, buddy. Max says wrong vocab used on the pokey vote the bear. Got you there, Max. Dan says Freddie Welsh wanted the draws exactly. Packey got robbed. Called it a draw for sure. In the UK, and the press and fans said Packey got robbed. Certainly, yes, that was the case there, Dan. So there's no question. If you look at the newspaper accounts, and of course we have video of the third fight between McFarland and Welsh, that McFarland got the better of Welsh overall. He can be considered the better fighter. And we know that Welsh is top tier. So that's just one example. I mentioned Owen Moran, who was smaller for sure, but another former world champion, or at least recognized as such widely. And Packey McFarland has a victory over him. So those are the type of things that really kind of factor in. Random says great opponent list. Yes, and that was just to name some of them. And then not to mention in one of his final fights, as a matter of fact, his final official fight was against Mike Gibbons. What is Mike's nickname? The Phantom, the St. Paul Phantom, Mike Gibbons. And he's one of the greatest middleweights the sport has seen. And he and Packey McFarland fought. And when they fought, when they fought, Packey McFarland was coming off of about 2-year layoff or whatnot. And the fight, some lauded the fight, but a lot of press was associated with it. This was one that was a no decision bout. And if you look at all of the press, it was closer. It was close, but Packey McFarland had more people that felt he had the nod over Mike Gibbons, who had been more active than Packey at that particular time. So that's another fight or fighter that Packey McFarland is associated with. Just By says Britain was superhuman. The amount of fights he had is crazy. Exactly. We know about that rivalry between he and Britain. Ted Kid Lewis. I had to think about it there for a second. But we know about that rivalry between Britain and Ted Kid Lewis, arguably, I'm not going to say arguably, the greatest rivalry in the sport of boxing as far as the history is concerned. When you fight a guy 20 times, I mean, what more can you say? Now, there's been some that have gotten pretty close to that for sure. Think about some of the rivalries that Sam Langford had. Him being in there with the likes of Harry Wills, being in there with Joe Jeanette, being in there with freaking Jeff Clark, all those guys, man. It just so Sam Langford, he had a lot of rivalries himself there, to be honest with you. But you could argue and lean towards Britain, Ted Kid Lewis. World title was exchanging hands in some of those fights, not all of them. Matter of fact, it might have been like three to four of them. We're working on a video where it had been at least of that rivalry, but we'll get there. Joshua Woods, welcome, buddy. Appreciate it. Fellow Joshua in the building says, forgotten great here, not champ, about as much. So, yes. Here, not chat. Oh, okay. Gotcha. Yes, a forgotten great. Gotcha, Joshua Woods. So, if you drop back in this thing, you can chat a bit more. Hey, it's all good. It's all good there, buddy. Appreciate you dropping by. Always sharing some good knowledge as well. Yeah, Britain was very tough, and very skilled for sure. He could box. He was another one of those guys who, despite those 300+ fights, he wasn't knocking guys out. He didn't have a ton of knockouts relative to the amount of fights that he had. So, therefore, he had to box his way through those contests. And we know about other boxers who've gone through similar types of careers where they had a crazy amount of fights and had to literally box their way in there with guys who could punch, guys who were stronger at times, faster, you name it. But they overcame. Rodolfo listening on his way home. It's hot as hell. Yeah, it gets hot out that way right there. West Coast holding it down. Appreciate you doing so there, Rodolfo. Dan says Freddie Wells was awesome, though really awesome. Vegetarian, too, like a lot of great fighters. Me, too. Hey, that's good that you're a vegetarian there, Dan. Good stuff. Keep it up. I'm encouraging it. That's the way to go. I need to get on some of that as well. I'm not against it. I can certainly do it. I just have to be consistent. Joshua Woods says both Mike and Tommy were great fighters. Most certainly there. Joshua Woods, interestingly enough, neither one of them won a world title, but there were certainly two that were worthy of world titles. They could beat a lot of world title lists and people or individuals who won world titles in their career. There were certainly two that could hang with the very best of them and beat the majority of them. So great fighting tandem as far as brothers are concerned. And I know we've brought this up on occasions. If you think about fighting brother tandems, they might be the greatest. You have the Attels out there, but certainly it might be Gibbons, and I guess you look at it just full scale titles aside. Yeah, it might be those two. You had the Fulmer brothers, just a number of them out there. Some pretty good ones for sure. Really good. Oh, Bruce said, I must fly, bro. I'll listen to the rest later. All right, Bruce. Appreciate you dropping by, buddy. Hey, be sure to check him out, folks. Bruce Gas Boxing Jazz. So take care for sure there, Bruce. Joshua Wood says, Brother Tommy fought Dempsey for the title. That is the case. That was at heavyweight. Now, of course, Tommy's best work was at light heavyweight, but he did fight at heavyweight. He did fight Jack Dempsey. And for those that may not know, this was the bankruptcy fight. It was in Shelby, Montana. And the city only had enough funding, and I guess really, technically speaking, not even enough in that regard, but enough, I guess, to pay Jack Dempsey, and the city went bankrupt in doing so, from what I recall, at least. And we got to have to double check this. I believe that the promoter, everyone lost money outside of Dempsey. I don't know if Gibbons even got paid in that contest, given such, but just shows you, hey, sometimes it doesn't work out in every place that you want to host a fight. Could have been a number of things that fed into it, but it's just one of those things. Pretty crazy, right? Fight, and a town went bankrupt hosting a fight. And Jack Dempsey, we know his popularity and all that stuff, so it's crazy just to think about that. How do you take vegetarianism, Dan? Hey, good question there, Henry. Hey, Beagle 47. Welcome, Beagle. Appreciate you there, buddy. Hey, anytime you join in, Beagle, it's all good. We really just been kind of talking around a number of different subjects, with it being centered on Packey McFarland, who was a great lightweight, and some of the lightweights he faced off against. But yeah, I wanted to get individual thoughts for sure on those he didn't face off against that he could have potentially faced. Now, I think that Packey McFarland, had he gotten the opportunity, would have been a bit much for battling Nelson. And we know battling Nelson was as game as they come. And I think Packey McFarland would have gotten him. Now, there are some that feel that Packey McFarland was bigger, a weight bully in some sense. You did hear some stuff kind of that nature right there. Some thinking that he was above the lightweight limit in most cases. And Packey McFarland, he stuck to a pretty strict diet. I believe he was, vegetarian or something close to it or whatnot. And he made sure that he adhered to his body in particular ways, but that he was one of those guys, as I mentioned, he had pretty solid size for the weight. And generally, with him being around 135, I think that's what it was. Him being more around 135, 136, his most comfortable weight right there. And when the lightweight championship was being competed at, like, for instance, 133, he didn't want to take those extra steps and maybe ruin himself or force his body down to a weight that he didn't feel comfortable with. And hey, you can't argue against such, especially if you're the one going in there. You know how your body feels. And as mentioned, he took care of his body, and that was one of his prime things. Then you can't blame him in some sense. One fighter said, one fighter says he became even better when he went vegetarian. Can't remember who. Oh, yeah, there are probably some others out there that have done that for sure there, Boz. Sure. Longest boxing match ever, says Fly Hopper. Oh, yeah, I saw something about that. Something, I can't remember what it is. There have been some long ones, though. I can't remember what the longest one is myself there, Fly Hopper, but there have been some great fights that have extended great deals of time. I know some of them, but yeah, the longest, I can't remember off top, but I actually recently saw a post where someone was talking about that. I can't remember exactly how long it was though, but just think several hours, many hours, beyond 5 hours for sure. Dan says, Henry H. Okay, gotcha. The stuff you work on. No, that's good. And stay away from the sugars. That's one good thing. Joshua Woods, McFarland short run, he did fight the best out there. He did. That's one of the things about Packey McFarland. I read off some of those names, and I didn't even get to all of them. But he fought Tommy Kilbane, for instance, Lockport Jimmy Duffy. I read some of them. Lockport Jimmy Duffy. I mean, come on. These are guys who are top tier if you know about them for sure. I mentioned Jack Britton. I believe that was a trilogy when you fought Jack Britton. Battling Terry, that's another name out there, a guy who could fight, contender from the time. Not going to ring many bells, but a guy who could fight. He was in there with it, and Terry was in with a lot of top-tier competition himself. So Packey McFarland. But, of course, the marquee fights, as I mentioned, that got away from Packey McFarland were Joe Gans, Ed Wolgast, battling Nelson. And he also had the opportunity to fight Willie Ritchie, but they were friends, and he didn't want to fight Willie Ritchie for the lightweight title because they were training mates, sparring mates, I guess you can say it. And Packey liked Ritchie. He didn't want to go in, I'd imagine, and really probably he couldn't find it in him to really battle it out in the way that he needed against a guy like Ritchie, who he was friends with and was fond of, essentially. So that's what I found out through researching him. So that was another opportunity where he missed out on it. If it were not for Dipsy and Greb, Tommy Gibbons would have certainly been a world champ. Certainly there, Max. Certainly, yeah. Those are two big names on the ledger right there who shortened things for them and or ended the expectations or whatever you want to call it, ups, and he wasn't able to overcome. But hey, two great fighters right there. And in the case of Greb, I mean, yeah, a lot of people ran into that issue for sure. For sure. Henry, we don't have much protein to stress these. Okay, good to go. Talking that. Rodolfo said Shelby didn't have that Saudi money. No, if they'd had that today, that fight would have went on, no issues at all. Let me keep going. To be fair, a farm town in that day or even today cannot host a title fight of that level. Certainly, there Joshua was. That was asking a lot. Big old, yeah, appreciate you in here. Joshua Wood says hosting an Usyk fight in a small town would, well, in your small town. Okay, gotcha. Yeah, hey, let's make it happen. Y'all can handle it there, Joshua. Bring all the folks in. Dan Shelby has a federal penitentiary there. I saw 3 years back. That's crazy. QB Ryan Leaf sit there. Oh, okay, didn't know that right there. I know Ryan. Freddie Welch was a vegetarian. Okay. So Pretty was vegetarian. Got it. Tommy Shelby. Oh, okay. You're just kidding there, Bob. It depends on the fighter. Rocky Marciano or Dempsey needed their steaks. Yeah, some fighters need that protein. That's all that was thrown out there. Let's see here. I have an hour-long. So Joshua Woods has an hour-long training footage of Dempsey. He was eating steak and eggs. Wouldn't doubt it. I saw Brazilians mentioned Eder Joffrey. I mean, Henry Marciano, definitely a meat eater. Spit out grizzle, didn't swallow much, just the juice. That's funny. Eder Joffrey, yeah, one of the greatest for sure. Another one with a record close to that of McFarland's in terms of just the number of fights, and didn't see defeat often. And those 2 defeats, I believe, were fighting Hirata, right? So that was the only person that beat him, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, he's another great fighter right there, Brazilian fighter. You could argue Brazil's greatest fighter for sure. So a lot to throw out there, but yeah, Packey McFarland. So Joe Gaines would have been an interesting contest for him. Now, when McFarland would have had the opportunity to fight Gaines, this would have likely been Gaines at a point in which he was no longer the Gaines of old. As we know, Joe Gaines died of tuberculosis in the back end of his career. I think he was around 34, 35 at the time, somewhere around there at least. He had lost the title by the time he died of tuberculosis, lost it to battling Nelson. But that being said, had he and McFarland faced off, that would have been an opportunity right there to see 2 of the absolute greats that the lightweight division or just lower weight fighters in general has ever seen. It would have been tactician against tactician in some sense, because Joe Gaines had that ability as well to think in there and out-moxie a fighter. And some of the things that would have come into play, of course, are the power of Joe Gaines, that being on his side. So you had to factor in that power. How would Packey McFarland deal with it? And he was in with some guys that could punch. And he competed with those guys during his career. So I think from an IQ standpoint, McFarland would have had what it takes to be able to provide a means of frustrating Gaines, not allowing for him to land as cleanly with some of those big shots, to be able to launch that vaunted power that he does have. You had to factor in things like speed, which would have probably been fairly even, around there. Packey was light on his feet. He could move around. Very good defensive fighter. Joe Gaines could be at points, but certainly he could be focused and geared towards offense. You'd probably say he was probably more so geared towards the offensive side. And both of them fought a high level of competition. You could probably give the slight resume edge to Joe Gaines, just given some of the names on his ledger when you factor in the guys like freaking Jack Blackburn, Sam Langford, Barbados Joe Walcott, you name it. But yeah, certainly the resume edge goes with Joe Gaines, but that would have been a heck of a fight. Another thing would have been the size would have been on Packey McFarland's side. I believe the reach might have been as well. Might have had an inch or two on Joe Gans as far as reach, but he would have had him in height with Gans being, I guess, kind of 5'6" but I think it wasn't far off. But Gans and McFarland, that would have been a hell of a contest right there. And hard to say exactly who would have won it, but man, so many things could be, or so many scenarios could drive a different type of fight for sure. And it depends on the length. I think that type of stuff would actually go into the fold. Like McFarland didn't like to fight longer fights. As a matter of fact, I think he only fought once at 20 rounds. I could, if I recall correctly, I don't think he went over 20 rounds, and he only fought once. One 20-round fight. Don't quote me on that, but I believe that was the case right there. So he wasn't one who was for fighting beyond that. And we know that, I mean, Joe Gans and battling Nelson, they fought a crazy amount of rounds between the 3 fights that they did fight. And yeah, we know it was well above that. That first one being 41 rounds or something like that. And yeah, it's just insane to think about. Insane. Just think about 40 plus rounds of fighting. So that's another thing that factors in, and that could determine how McFarland looked in a fight. Now, just based on how McFarland went about training and his aptness to what was going on with his body, I have no doubt that he would have been able to do what he needed to do to be able to last and withstand the physical piece from a conditioning standpoint. But then when you factor in with what's coming back from Gans, etc., then his experience in those longer fights, if it was going above 15 rounds, certainly might be more in favor of Joe Gans. Certainly. A little bit less, there are ways in which McFarland could get that victory right there. Gans, it would depend on if he came in focused as well. So very interesting to think about it. Joshua Wood says Harada was like Henry Armstrong style-wise. Okay, good stuff. I need to see more fighting Harada. But yeah, hey, the only man to take out Joffrey. So that says something right there. One fight dead close there, Boz says. Got it. Yeah, just died not too long ago. Dementia. Yeah, I know that. That was like, I think that was last year. If not last year, the year before. But yeah, it wasn't that long ago for sure. There, Dan. It definitely wasn't. So, yep, RP to Eder Joffrey. Brazil's greatest boxer. We know they're a fighting country for sure. So they've got some great fighters. Brazilians, they're all throughout the MMA world. Boxing, we don't have as many that rise to that top level to the degree that they do in MMA. Though you have Conceição, what's his name? Edson Conceição. He's one that comes to mind. Lionel Rose, didn't he beat Harada for world titles? Oh yeah. I think that the moment Gans may have been defeated in his condition, etc. You never know though. Yeah, Joshua Woods. Yeah, that would have certainly factored in. The thing about that, about tuberculosis, it took out a lot of people during that period. And from my understanding, and I'm not a medical expert, I guess it could lay kind of dormant in some situations, or you could have instances where it was seemingly dormant and then it could come about again. That's what happened with Nonpareil Jack Dempsey, who we mentioned earlier. I know for sure with Nonpareil Jack Dempsey, he went through bouts of tuberculosis. And eventually he succumbed to it at one point, but he had gone through a bout with tuberculosis previously, maybe more than one, and was able to overcome and continue fighting. So you just never know. Just never know there. So that good point there, Joshua Woods. That could have felt it. That could have factored in. Gans Nelson was crazy, absolutely crazy right there, and it's even crazier. We have footage. So if you haven't seen, look up Gans Nelson. Some footage will pop up. Now, the original was kind of grainy, but I know that there have been those that have gone and made some edits to Gans Nelson. I believe it's the first fight. I can't remember if any of the other ones are there, but I believe it's only the first fight that is there, or what you will find on YouTube at least. And it's worth checking out. As mentioned, 40 plus rounds in the desert. I believe it was Reno, Nevada at that particular time, and no top cover shade, any of that. You're just out there fighting in the sun. They have those little towels, wet towels, just blowing you. Maybe they were wet. I don't even know. Maybe they weren't wet, but they were doing what they could. And Nelson Wolgass, yep, that's another classic one right there. There's a bloody picture out there of Wolgass and Nelson. You'll see Nelson bloodied in the face right there at Wolgass. So that was another one Packey McFarland could have fought. So Wolgass, very interesting fighter. I mean, I don't know everything about Ed Wolgass, but he's one of those names that when you look at lightweights, he definitely has ranks among the top. And there are opportunities in which he and McFarland were going to fight. Now, it wasn't solely on Wolgass. Some of this came down to his management as well, as far as being able to make this fight materialize. And then I mentioned when it was going to happen in Milwaukee at one point, the sheriff stopped it basically, or he had orders from the governor, or he wasn't going to allow for it without the governor or lieutenant governor providing sign off. So that's why it didn't happen. That would have been an interesting fight right there. Wolgass, man, he was one of those fighters that could bang. He could get in there. He didn't care about scrapping. And I think ultimately, though, that's one I would have favored. Packey McFarland, I think the size would have come into play. And I think a part of me feels that, yeah, McFarland would have been able to outbox Wolgass over the course of however long the fight is. Same would have been the case with battling Nelson, the guy in which Wolgass conquered in terms of winning the world title. I just think Packey McFarland was the better boxer of the trio right there, and therefore he would have found a way to get it done against both of those guys. Not that they wouldn't have put up a fight, and a hell of a fight at that. But that being said, I just think that Packey McFarland, skill set, IQ, size, footwork, I think that would have gave him favor in a contest with those individuals for sure. Gans and Nelson must have been Superman on that day. This was not a slow paced fight. If you've seen the hour footage, certainly there Joshua was. Yeah, it's amazing to actually see that. Now I've seen it, and yeah, it was not slow paced. Sometimes they often wonder. Sometimes some people confuse, or I've seen where people confuse, of course, the London prize ring rules, bare knuckle rules with the boxing of that period, and they say that, oh no, these guys, a knockdown counted as at the end of a round back then. I think that's because they're just kind of confusing that period of those different fighting forms, London prize rings and such. But no, these guys were fighting under the Marquess of Queensberry rules. So these were 3-minute rounds that were going down. And so when you look at these guys who were fighting post 1900 for sure, and realistically, I guess you could say post 1890s, and just before that, really, then yeah, they were fighting under Marquess of Queensberry rules. So 3-minute rounds, certainly, that speaks even more volumes. Gans Nelson, 3-minute rounds. It's crazy. So that's something you have to factor in when you think about fantasy matchups, how these fighters match up, and why sometimes it's hard to even consider such. And the sport was very different at that particular time because these guys these days aren't fighting that many rounds in succession in a single fight. I mean, come on. That's what you have to actually factor into it. Oh, that's good. Yeah, Joffrey, Great steward of the sport right there. Boz, add wall guys gets overlooked, doesn't he? Yeah, that says Dan. But yes, certainly there, Dan. Certainly a name that is out there. Oh, Boz, you out of here? All right, Boz. Have a good one. Appreciate you dropping by. Boz, then Joshua Woods. Yeah, I do wish Gans Nelson was in better viewing, but it was better than nothing. Most certainly. Most certainly. Towels were for smoke, Dan says. Okay, gotcha. Gotcha. Uh, Gaming says, "Are you a boxer? 86 boxing? No, I officiate boxing though. I don't box other than when I'm hitting the heavy bag, that type stuff. But I've considered getting in there for a master's fight on the amateur side. If I had to get permission to do that though. Permission from the better half, and yeah, I can't do it without her sign off. But I officiate their fly hopper, so usually in the mix, especially in the amateur boxing scene here in DC. So what is going on here? Pretty much know what's going on. Part of the organization that handles the sanctions here in this area. So I'm involved with it on a routine basis, you could say. Joshua Wood said, "Yeah, sometimes big fights don't happen even back then because both parties would not agree with the terms, money, etc." Yeah, money was an issue with McFarland versus Nelson as well, and Nelson and his team was trying to lowball McFarland at points. And when McFarland did agree, even though he was getting the short end of the stick in the motion picture money, as they called it then, it still fell out, and I think, yeah, ultimately battling Nelson didn't really want that contest. He didn't really want those problems. So it's the nature of the beast when you're dealing with some folk who, hey, may not necessarily want to get in there with you. It's crazy. When Marciano was champ, Al wanted Marciano to fight in the smallest ring possible. What are the terms of his title fight? Yeah, hey, you look for whatever advantage you can get. You're in there fighting, scrapping. You never know what can happen. So if you can get any slight edge, you take it. And Marciano is the first, certainly not the last. And you see it. There's a reason that the guy that boxes and moves, he prefers the larger ring. And if you're on the A side, as we coin it these days, then you typically get the ring that you want. You typically get the gloves that you want, or do certain things to ensure that you ultimately end up with the gloves that you want, and that your opponent ends up with the gloves that you prefer on their hands come fight time. So the nature of it, especially when you're coming in as a lesser known fighter, for sure. Alexander Campbell, in a fight to the finish, Nelson would probably beat McFarland. In a modern 12 to previous 15 rounder, probably McFarland. Great point right there, Alexander Campbell. I think you're on to something for sure. Yeah, when you factor it in from that perspective, I think not unlike the Gann situation in one of those longer drawn out fights, Nelson will have had more experience, and Nelson, he could brawl. He would brawl in there, so he was game marching forward, and he was willing to take a shot to get his off. So, and he was tough as they come for sure. So taking shots and getting damage, hey, that was nothing to him. Another day at the office. So I think you make a good point there, Alex, thinking about it from that perspective. I think, yeah, in a just kind of, yeah, sort of modern, as you mentioned, or 15 and below McFarland, I think you could outbox him and find that room to be able to stay away from him where he needed to. But certainly when you start to go further and further into fights and that attrition kicks in, well, I think McFarland would have the conditioning to kind of, just based on what I know of his dedication to his body, that type of conditioning to be able to hang on, at least to go that route. It's different, of course. It is hard to predict. We have someone coming back at you who is kind of built for that long run, that long haul as well, has that experience in it. And that would have been the case certainly with both of those guys, being Gans and battling Nelson, as it pertained to Packey. So, hey, I think you're spot on there, Alex, good point. Good point you brought up there for sure. LPR is completely different. Yeah, it was more Greco wrestling, but not really hard to explain. You could body slam if you got a grab in. Yep, that's right, Joshua Woods. I think some people confuse that with some of the fights that came later. Like, no, those guys in the 1910s, they weren't fighting like some of these big fights that we're talking about, at least. No, they weren't fighting under their London Pride ring or anything of that nature. They were fighting gloved. MOQ. Funny you say that, Alex. Battling Nelson, hated McFarland, both Chicago. Oh, yeah, that is true. Great point right there, Dan. Yeah, there was a distaste and dislike there between the two for sure. And McFarland or Nelson took shots at McFarland in the media. He took some shots at him. And Nelson wasn't afraid to open his mouth. Now, I put in a video that I mentioned that we did on the channel how Gans, he thought that McFarland would defeat Battling Nelson, and that sparked some of the back and forth as well. So, yeah, they had a sort of disdain. Hey, great fighters from Chicago. You know, Chicago, this was during a period in which Chicago, well, boxing was banned in Chicago. You remember it was banned until like the early 20s or something like that. And this stemmed from the Joe Gans, Terry McGovern fight. That's why you see a lot of those guys from Chicago at that particular period. They fought in Wisconsin. Milwaukee was a fight town, or that general area. So that was a fight area, a fight city, town, whatever you want to call it. And you had a lot of Chicago fighters that were fighting in Wisconsin, you know, that general area. And that was because boxing was banned there in Chicago. So, yeah, it's pretty funny. So, but both of those, Chicago, think about Milwaukee, those were fight towns back then. You know, we don't see it as often these days. Alexander Usyk fought in Chicago. I don't know how many years back, but it was some years back. Probably within the last 5 years. But Usyk fought in Chicago, and that was one of the big Chicago matches of recent memory, unless someone knows of another. But that's the one that I can remember in recent memory. But not quite like what it used to be. But this was a fighting city right here, Chicago. You think about Dempsey versus Tunney in that second fight, maybe? I think it's the second fight. First or second, one or two. And, man, they had 100,000 plus people there in Chicago watching that fight. So it's crazy how things shift in some sense. Same with Boston, fight city. Think about it these days. Of course, fights still take place there, but as far as the big ones, you don't often get those cards. And yeah, just kind of the nature of things. But when you do get those cards, seems like the turnout's pretty damn good. So maybe promoters should kind of catch on. London Pride ring fights with today, boxing fans look like pro wrestling bouts. Yeah, certainly there, Alex. Certainly. And you wouldn't enjoy it. These fans certainly wouldn't enjoy it. Max Duran says round 42 is when the fight ended in the Gans Nelson. Crazy. Yeah, crazy. Round 42. You hear that, folks? Round 42. And contrary to belief, for some at least, no, it was not London Pride's ring. It was Marcus of Queensbury, round 42. And like I've mentioned, others have mentioned, it's not uncommon during that time. You just have to be built to go that route, go that distance. Yeah, if you recall, when Jack Johnson got knocked out by Jess Willard, that was in the 26th round. These were 3-minute rounds, folks. 3 minutes. So we're not talking 36 minutes. Or, yeah. You know what we think about today. But it's crazy. Crazy. Ali, on the other hand, went for the largest ring. Yes, certainly. Hey, a larger ring certainly benefited Muhammad Ali. So it can move around. Be on those toes. So, yes, certainly, if you had the opportunity to do so, you're going to get that large ring. If you're a guy like Joe Frazier or something, if smaller ring, it probably benefits you more. You can get in there, get to landing those hooks. So I was watching Joe Frazier versus Jerry Corey last night. Man, some heavy leather exchange there. RIP to both, but heavy leather exchange. That channel Fight Films guy did a full-fledged, full broadcast of it. He pieced together a bunch of different pieces of footage or whatever. It's a channel. If you want to see some old footage, it's called Fight Films Guy. I was trying to interview him. I sent him an email once. I'm going to reach back out to him. I just want to know more about him and his process, considering that, hey, he's responsible for putting some pretty solid footage out of there. He's got that old movie reel footage. I don't even know what you call it. Maybe it's the stuff they use out in Hollywood, I guess you can say. It's not nitrate film, I don't think, but I'm thinking some of it probably did derive, but it's the old reels where you actually have the film look through. So it's a process for sure. That's one of the greatest long rounds fights. Yep. Mayweather could outbox Nelson for 12 rounds easy, but if it was 40 plus, yeah, certainly. Certainly. Different story right there. That changes the dynamic. That really pulls out and brings about what you're made of, you know. Oh, yes, Joshua knows this stuff for sure there, Dan. Oh, Joshua knows this stuff. Joshua Woods. Appreciate you being in here, Joshua, as always. I think the mob helped make boxing legal in Chicago. They wouldn't doubt it there. Wouldn't doubt it there, Joshua. You know they had some play for sure. And Chicago, think about mobs. Yeah, Chicago, hey, there were heavy rollers back then. Hey, maybe even now, but some heavy rollers were coming through Chicago at the time. Edis, what's going on, Edis? I think I'm saying it right. Edis Fernandez. Appreciate you jumping on the channel that time you did with Boz as well. Appreciate you. Salute to you there. Glad you're in here, buddy. We're talking some Packey McFarland, histrionics, all that good stuff. Rodolfo says, was it when he went against Chaz Witherspoon? That could have been in Chicago right there, Rodolfo. That could have very well been the one that was in Chicago. I had to look it up. Al Capone was a pretty big fight fan, so he had some say what can be legal. Oh, yeah, Al Capone, yeah. Yep, I've seen him in some fight footages, references, and coming into fights and all that stuff, some of the old footage there. So no doubt about it that Al Capone was a fight fan. So that tells you. Dan said, did anyone see the final bell long tough fight against the great Mike Gibbons? Packy's clocks a big right hand and stops just short of hitting Gibbons at the end of the fight. Tough customer, Packy won too. Yeah. In terms of the nods from the viewing public and those at ringside, as mentioned, there were a lot of people who thought that Gibbons won, but the majority of people, or the majority of newspapers for sure, thought that Packey McFarland got the better of Mike Gibbons. And this was, as mentioned, Packey McFarland coming off of about 2-year layoff. Dan Packey came out of retirement. Yep. Oh, yeah, and it was at middleweight, another thing to factor in. And Packey was considered a big lightweight, but if I recall correctly, he hadn't fought at middleweight, so that was his first and only fight at middleweight. That tells you, hey, great fighter right there. Now, it was not the middleweight as you know it today in terms of 160 pounds. I think they fought at a catch weight, as a matter of fact. Where was it at? I think it was closer to welterweight, actually. I can't remember exactly, but it's in the video. Check out the video, folks, if you have it. Yeah, LPR Johnson would have had time to recover from that knockout. Just laid him on. Yep. He would have there, Joshua. So yeah, he got clocked. It was like, oh my goodness, he had already gone 26 rounds, and they were in Cuba. Similar situation, and no top cover. You know, if they fight outside these days, I don't think they fight without top cover. We do in the amateur boxing thing, but I'm trying to think of a pro fight. Well, I guess even out there in that StubHub Center, which they might have renamed out in California, that was one where it's an outside Coliseum-like feel to it, with the little seats going down right there. I believe they had top cover too. So I can't remember the last one, or in modern times, any fights where you didn't have the little kit or whatever it may be covering the top, some type of thing. So back then, hey, you're just out there. If that sun's beaming, that sun is beaming. Is that Max Duran said what happened to Quarry after his boxing career? Yeah, it is. And I saw this little documentary not too long ago, literally weeks ago, where it was a little short one where they were talking about that and how he died at 50, I believe it was. And even before he got to 50, he was suffering a lot of issues. That is a pretty sad story because he could not do anything or do much by himself. Things like getting dressed. He could speak a little bit, but not fully coherent at all points. And yeah, that's unfortunate. Certainly unfortunate. Shows you that side of boxing that doesn't get the spotlight often, and sometimes, you can't blame the guys for taking the money, especially when you get that opportunity at some real big money. Because we've seen the good, we've seen the bad. And some of it could be genetics as well, because we've seen some guys who taking a lot of damage, and they seem to be fine and dandy when their careers are over by comparison to some others, or at least they don't go through the same type of perils as quickly as others, And I think of like George Chuvalo. I know there's interviews of him out there from not too long ago, and yeah, he seems perfectly fine, and we know he was in some fights where he took a lot of shots and all that stuff, and that's what he was known for, really. So it's unfortunate. Al Capone was a Dempsey fan, a big Dempsey fan there, Dan. Oh, yeah. Hey, who isn't? Most film was Nitro film of that day. Okay, Joshua, yeah. I was mentioning that. The old nitrate film. Max, 2 of his brothers died. Pugilistic dementia. Yeah, that's crazy. That's unfortunate for sure. Then I'm pretty sure the mob tried to make Tony throw that second fight. I was thinking about that, came to mind right there, Max Duran. Something came into play. Now, I heard something about the referee having some involvement as well. And the referee maybe was switched out. I don't know. I could be mixing two stories, but I heard something with the referee in that second fight. And then, some of it could be, thoughts or theories, thinking about the long count. And then when Tunney dropped Dempsey, the count started immediately without Tunney retreating to the neutral corner. So those are some of the kind of theories that are out there. Max, remember that KO Mike Corey took from Bob Foster? Oh, wow. Foster. Oh, yeah, we know Bob could punch. Yeah. Edith says it's great to have a historic commentary mini channel talking on today's Diva Boxing era. Certainly. Hey, thanks, buddy. No, it's great. I love talking history. I'm going to try to do it more, as a matter of fact, to keep it going a bit. Hey, nothing stopping. I have some stuff that, we can talk about history-wise. I'm going to try to set up another one here for, hopefully I can get one jumping off this week with Random Acoustic Thoughts, maybe on Thursday. Maybe we'll be back in the mix here on Thursday with another history discussion with Random Acoustic Thoughts. We're going to team up for something. Max says Marvin Hagler had natural headgear, so he didn't really have any side effects as far as we know from boxing, unless his death had something to do with it. Yeah, no, you make a good point there, Max. You do make a good point. So, I know his death came and seemingly kind of sudden, but I don't recall if they mentioned it being from anything like dementia or whatnot. Could have been some other condition or something that he was dealing with. But very interesting. Very interesting for sure. I know some boxers here in the area and all this stuff who had a lot of fights, and they're fine, So it's interesting. And it's tough. Speaking of taking punishment, anybody remember Scott Ledoux? Oh yeah, I know who you're talking about there, Alex. Yeah, Scott Ledoux or Ledoux. But yeah, remember for sure. Yeah, there's some guys. Oh yeah, Dan Lamata was a historic rockhead. Couldn't hurt him with a bat. Oh yeah, he lived in '95. Still saw. Yeah, another perfect prime example right there, Dan. Very, very solid example right there. Probably the foremost example. You're right. 95, and he was still doing interviews. Late in life, and was speaking as expected. And yeah, that's another example. And he took some punishment, even though he could box too. That's one of the things. And I know somebody else chat, old school boxer, shout out to old school boxing, wants me to do a chat discussion on Jake LaMotta. I had to employ some others as well because I know a little bit about LaMotta. Not a ton, certainly not an expert on LaMotta, but great fighter. And he could box contrary to belief. And what I mean by that is he was skilled. He could take some punishment, but it wasn't necessarily because he wasn't skilled enough to, at least try to kind of thwart some of that. Hey, sometimes it just happens. And he's a guy, when you see him boxing in there, it's easy to kind of watch Jake LaMotta operate, in my eyes at least. So I like LaMotta, but certainly one of those prime examples. Took a lot of damage and, hey, lived a long life. Max around. The Quarry brother had sad endings, unfortunately. Yeah, that's unfortunate right there. Certainly unfortunate. And it's definitely unfortunate when guys come back a little later than what they should. It makes me wonder about this Mike Tyson Jake Paul thing. While Jake Paul isn't a huge threat in the sense of the Mike Tyson we knew or whatnot, at the end of the day, he is 58 and he just had a little health scare. And they're still talking about doing that fight. Oh no, I'm not a fan of it, to tell you that. Joshua Woods, I don't think the ref favor one guy over the other in Dipsy 22. The long count, Jack forgot the rules and his knockdown. Dipsy up so fast the ref too fast for him to react. Got you there, Joshua. Hey, yeah. No, I think you could be pretty much right there, Joshua. I know I've seen read online mention of such, But yeah, ref probably didn't have anything to do with it. Sometimes the refs can get a bad rep. Hey, I know that firsthand myself. I know the refs can get a bad rep. There's a video out there on the channel, I know recently, from a little amateur boxing event I did, where I had to stop a fight and people were saying I made a bad call and all that stuff, but they only saw like a 30-second clip in the second round, right there towards the end of the second round, but they didn't see the first round in the first minute and a half of the second round. So they were just making an assumption, like it wasn't a competitive fight at that point. So you never know, right? But I just laugh at it because it's funny. Scott, he died of dementia too. Awesome chin, super tough era, underrated fighter. What? Oh yeah, Scott Ledoux. How about Smelling? Fought 25 tough years, lived to 99, always sharp. Yeah, you're right. Another one right there, Max Smelling. For sure. So yeah, that's another example. And also the guy Harry Haft, who I did a video on and made the movie about Harry Haft, and he was another guy. He fought, but he was a Holocaust victim, or at least he was locked up at Auschwitz, and he ended up getting out. He had to fight while he was there in Auschwitz, and then he turned pro once he was able to get out, survive, and all that stuff. And I saw there's like an interview out there of him from like the 90s or something like that. Crazy. Historic stuff. Super historic. Crazy. And the better boxers in Lewis was Poor Health versus Smelling. Yeah. The better boxer in Lewis was in Pro. Yeah, right. Man, that knockout of There was a solid knockout Smelling got over Lewis, but yeah, if you look at Lewis in that second fight with Smelling, man, that was a brutal knock. That was brutal what Max was taking those punches, especially when you watch it in slow mo. It doesn't last that long, of course, but man, he was laying into Smelling, and it was just like, oof. So yeah, it's crazy. Exactly like Ezzard Charles shouldn't have fought Rocky, but not mistaken, he was already suffering from ALS before both of their fights. Wow, yeah, that's pretty crazy to think about that. And this is a guy that was fighting at middleweight at one point. And while Rocky wasn't a big heavyweight, he was still a bigger guy in that sense in terms of the weight and insane trainer and could punch. So yeah. Joshua Wood says, I'll give Paul a good chance to beat 58-year-old Tyson. Yes, certainly, especially coming off a health scare. I mean, yeah, I feel like Mike shouldn't do it. I agree with you, Max. Mike should stay retired. Jake is an idiot for thinking this is a good idea because, Jake, he's going to, for him, he just sees that, hey, this is a boxer. Even though he's older, he's still a boxer, former world heavyweight champion. Yeah, you got to feel like Jake can find some other individuals to understand the money dynamic, but you can find some younger guys to make some money with as well. How about one of the top guys? If you can lure one of them in, I mean, but yeah, fighting Tyson at 58. We saw how, I think that's the same age Holyfield was when he was in there with Vitor Belfort, we know he was past it himself. He was 40-something, but still, 58-year-old Tyson, yeah, just doesn't bode well. Joshua needs that brutal KO from Lewis and Smelling was already in 15 years of prime fight. Pre-fighting. Yeah, I know what you're saying. You said that. I know what you're saying there, Dan. That wasn't the best version of Smelling. It was a brutal one, but yeah, it might not have been. Certainly, they kind of blackballed Smelling from that title after that Lewis knockout. So certainly. Well, Max was a paratrooper. We airborne troopers live long lives with painful ankle, knees, and broken fourth points of contact. Certainly there, Alex. Salute to you. Shout out to all the veterans out there. We all know how it goes down. But you're right there, Alex. Mm-hmm. Yeah, his knees were probably rickety. Mm-hmm. Joshua Wood says, Marciano gave Charles a real bad beating in both fights. And that film of Charles before his death is still chilling. Oh, yeah, I don't think I've seen that. That's crazy right there, Joshua Woods. But, yeah. I mean, crazy, sad stories, right? All too familiar in some cases in the sport of boxing. McLaren lived to 97, almost 98. Amazing. Crazy. Now, he didn't have a ton of fights compared to some of the guys from his era, but he had some very, very tough fights against high-level competition. So, yeah, that factors in for sure. The old McLaren and Jack Dempsey, 88, 89, yep. Old Jack Dempsey. I remember they said that I was either read or watched one of these documentaries where when Jack Dempsey died, there wasn't a ton of people at his funeral, which is crazy considering, at one point, you could argue the most popular man in the world when he was world heavyweight champion. So, man, what can the things time can do to things. I'm glad that we're able to document some of this stuff even in better fashion these days. Me being here, able to talk about history, you all talking about history, partaking, us engaging, conversing on this. I think this all adds to it. I mean, deserves those fighters put a lot out. Like I said, we're going to have more footage of the individuals fighting now. Someone brought it up. I think Edith. Yeah, of course, they're going to be well documented through all these different forms of social media. But let's not forget those who came before and what they were able to do, and us having some surviving footage and other forums in which we can follow their careers and what they were able to accomplish. So I don't think Charles had ALS at the time of the Marciano fights. You have about 5 years to live. In that time, it had to be in the mid-60s. Got you there, Joshua Woods. Interesting info. If Jake wants to be a great, find real contenders. Yeah, that's the question right there, Max. Does he want to be a great, good ref 86? Let the kids live to see another free round. Appreciate you there, Beagle. No doubt about it. Sometimes some of these people watching, parents, coaches even, they forget that these just are youngsters. These are just kids. They're not professionals. They're amateur boxers. They're amateurs. Safety is the utmost key. The referee's motto: you'd rather stop 1,000 fights too early than one fight too late. I stick by that. So it is what it is. You can yell at me, you can boo me, cuss me out, but you can't bring back damage that can't be reversed, or you can't fix irreversible damage. So, hey, the fight stopped too early. It is what it is. In this case, it wasn't too early. I say the kid, his mouth, nose, and eye was busted. He was bleeding. Had a cut under his eye. Nose was bleeding. Mouth was bleeding. And that was just in 1 2/3 rounds, So, goes to show you. Joshua Woods is sad that Charles never bet your fighter after those horrible beatings. Yeah, sometimes, that stuff can take a toll, especially moving up. Joshua, I may be mistaken, but I think he was already showing symptoms of an ALS. I don't think he was diagnosed yet, but was showing signs. I could be wrong, though. Yeah, I'm not 100% sure. So, yeah, you could be right there, Max. Yeah, the Charles film before he dies was dreadful. Interesting. If you want to see the film of Charles, just YouTube Edit Charles ALS, and it should pop up. Got you there, Joshua. Well, it makes me not want to watch it now. Makes me not want to watch it. But we'll see. Joshua Woods realized, I'll check it out. Joshua Woods realized Charles is the only guy Marciano beat up and even couldn't fight again, like Lewis had, Walcott, many others paralyzed Carmine Bingo. Okay. Yeah, I know. Is it Charles, man? He killed the guy in the ring as well. Of course, it was the boxing match, and the guy just happened to die. I think Burundi was his name. I think it was Burundi, and that's something that weighed on him. I remember that. Desert Charles, such a great fighter right there. You hear people talking middleweights, light heavyweights. His name rarely gets mentioned, but hey, all of you mention him here now know what a great and underrated fighter the Cincinnati Cobra was. I wanted to do a video on him. I feel like I need to dive into more. But if you look at his resume, insane. You'd be hard-pressed to find many better. The Cincinnati Cobra. Kid Matthews, a great fighter, not the same at the Marciano. Rex Lane. Yeah, hey, Marciano trained like a beast. Yeah, Dan, I was thinking Marciano took something off Charles, certainly. Dan, Burundi killed a guy just before that, too. Okay. Yeah, crazy. Yeah, you're right, because that's, it's kind of fake. Yeah, it's insane. Just think about it. You're right. I mentioned this in a video in the, I think it's a Violent El Murray video that I did on Violent El Murray, because he was an opponent of, Ezra Charles was an opponent of Violent El Murray. And, it's crazy to think that. But you're right. Burundi did kill the guy. It's insane. It's unfortunate. You don't want that to happen. But it is a dangerous sport, and we still see it today, There's a Japanese fighter that died. Well, he got hurt in late December of 2023 and died, I believe it was January of this year, from damage in a fight. I remember watching it and thinking he was good to go, You're just thinking he was good to go. You just like, you never know. Really makes you second guess and step back, because I remember watching in the contest, a fight of the year type contest, Some would say the fight of the year. And yeah, took some damage, took some knockdowns in a fight that, were it not for the knockdowns, he probably would have won, but he never recovered from the fight, even though he didn't get knocked out or knocked out cold or anything like that. But you're just crazy. Insane thing. Have a video out there on Harry Lewis, similar thing where he killed a guy in the ring. And we, of course, know about Max Bear. This happens like that sometimes. It's unfortunate. Packey McFarland, he was one of those guys he didn't really like to hurt people, his own quoted words at least. So it was stated that he took it a little bit easy on some guys and didn't really go for the knockout in the latter part of his career because, he didn't want to apply that type of damage to a fighter in that sense. And he was known to be a pretty good guy with his money as well, saved. So he was fine retiring when he did. So Packey McFarland, if you recall, I think it was 28 when he fought his last fight. I think it was 28 when he fought. I could be a little bit off. I think it was 28 or somewhere around there when he fought Mike Gibbons. And that was after a 2-year layoff. So he retired very early, and he already had over 100 fights. So just think if he kept going on, he would have been at 200 plus likely. Insane. The amount of fights they fought back then. Tony Perez, piece of shit referee for Norton Cooney, and Morrison Mercer, criminal. Oh, gotcha. Yeah, Don King had it out for those he didn't have. Oh, yeah, some brutal knockout there, huh? Yeah, I remember Morrison for sure. The way he got kind of clocked there. No one wants to kill their foe, I think. Max Barris supported Campbell's family after Max killed him. Yep, that is the case, yeah. The magnificent Max Bear. Joshua Woods. Yeah, no, you're right there, Joshua. I think you're on point. Man, my knowledge of boxing expands from this channel. Love it. Hey, same here, Max. From talking with others and all of that stuff. It's an expansion of the knowledge there. Hey, I appreciate being able to engage in everyone and talk about a lot of things that have taken place in the history of the sport. Alex says Charles lost a lot of killer instinct after the death of Burundi. Yeah. That's always the interesting thing, because some fighters, I'm sure they question whether they want to continue, and some do, but I'm sure they give it a lot of thought. And then it's your trade, like if someone dies on the job and say it's not boxing, just like the job, like for us folks, like a regular job, if someone dies on the job, you're sad and unfortunate about it, but of course you need to continue to work. That's how you bring in funding and all of that stuff, so you continue forward. So I think that kind of weighs in, but the only difference is, of course, you're going in and you're fighting another person, but it is the livelihood right there. So yeah, tough to deal with, I'd imagine. Tough to deal with. Dan, that referee let the great Alexis Olego take all types of shots without stopping to get prior fight in. Gotcha. So, okay, yeah, I didn't know he was the one for all those. Oh, those some interesting fights he was in right there. So he was getting big fights. Those some big fights that he was a part of there, Dan. That's crazy. But think about it. That is absolutely crazy. But yeah, man, insane stuff. But yeah, we've been going an hour and almost 40, We talked about a little Packey McFarland and everything else, but we're going to have to do this again for sure. I'll be back. We're going to talk more history. We need a little more history in our lives, right? We've got a lot of modern stuff going on. I want to talk more boxing history, so I'm going to set up some other stuff. We're going to talk about some other fighters that are out there, and I'm working on a very special video. I haven't really started it yet, but I'm about to start it, and it's going to be a special one. It's going to be a special one for sure, and I think you're going to really enjoy it. And it's going to be a fighter from Elden times as well as his trainer. And it's history focused, of course. Gonna try to step things up a notch. It's gonna take me a while for sure. It's gonna take me a good bit, but that's gonna be my next focal point. I'll see if I can release some mini things in between, but we'll see how it goes as far as that. But I think you're gonna really enjoy this next one that I'm gonna be working on. Sort of obscure fighter is that. I'll just leave it at that. Sort of obscure fighter, but once you see and hear the name, you'll know who he is. And he was in with some top level competition for sure. But yeah, appreciate everyone dropping by. Yeah, I'm with you, Dan. That should have been stopped. Probably shouldn't have ever happened anyway. And we sport look at gymnastics, Eleanor McKinnon, tragic story. Oh, I got to look that up right there, Joshua Woods. But I know they take a lot of ligament damage and stuff from the things that they do. Max Moran says, see you, Joshua. Have a good one. Hey, you too, Max, Joshua Woods, Dan, everybody. Appreciate y'all being in here. Max says, is rocking one second. Keep your hands up, chin down, and keep punching. Hey, that's the way you got to do it. Jesse Willard, I don't like. Should have been stopped. Certainly there, Dan. Absolutely brutal beating. Absolutely brutal with a capital B. See y'all for sure. Take a look at the movie Harder They Fall with Humphrey Bogart. Oh, yeah. I think you mentioned that before, Alex. Old Max Bear plays a mean fighter that beats an almost Canaro-like clone. Oh, okay. Harder They Fall. I'm going to check it out. I know what you're talking about there, Alex, and I know you mentioned that before. I'm going to check it out. Man, that's crazy. That's crazy for sure. But no, appreciate everyone dropping in. All those that stopped by, hey, we will connect once again. Enjoy the rest of your night. See you hopefully on Thursday. So be on the lookout. Post something on what the discussion will be. But take care, folks.